Welcome, mystic seekers, to Mystic Manor, where history meets mystery. Jolly, hard-working elves crafting toys in Santa's workshop. It's the image we've all grown up with. But what if I told you these cheerful helpers hide a much darker, more mysterious past? Their true origins are far from the cheerful, toy-making figures we know today. From ancient Norse legends of mischievous tricksters shaping medieval superstitions and weaving their way into Victorian holiday traditions, elves have evolved in ways you'd never expect. How did these figures transform over centuries to become symbols of Christmas magic? Their journey through myth and legend is full of surprises and a little mischief. To understand how elves became Santa's helpers, we must journey back to the icy forests of ancient Scandinavia. Here, in the mythology of the Norse people, we find the first tales of the álfar, or elves. These beings weren't jolly, playful helpers. They were something much more mysterious and far more powerful. In Norse mythology, elves were divided into two distinct types. The Ljósálfar, or light elves, were radiant, almost godlike beings who dwelled in Álfheimr, one of the 9 realms in Norse cosmology. Álfheimr was a land of light, beauty, and abundance, ruled by Freyr, the god of fertility, peace, and prosperity. Light elves were seen as benevolent and were often associated with creativity, healing, and inspiration. Artists and poets would pray to the elves for guidance, believing their touch could spark great works of art. But their counterparts, the Dökkálfar, or dark elves, were something entirely different. These shadowy figures lived underground in the darkest places of the earth. Unlike the light elves, they were feared for their malicious nature. They were known to cause sickness, misfortune, and even death to those who displeased them. To anger a dark elf was to risk your very life. Elves didn't just exist in the distant realms of Álfheimr or the underground shadows. In Norse beliefs, they had an active role in human life. Farmers, for example, would leave offerings of food or drink to the elves in hopes of securing good fortune. Milk, bread, or ale might be left at a special elf stone, a rock believed to house the spirit of a local elf. If the elves were pleased, they might bless the land with fertile crops, healthy livestock, and protection from harm. But if offended, the consequences could be catastrophic. Dark elves were known to punish humans with illness, misfortune, or sudden disasters. Stories tell of entire households cursed for failing to respect the elves. These beings existed in a delicate balance, capable of both blessing and destruction. One of the most unsettling aspects of Norse elf mythology was the legend of the changeling. Dark elves were believed to covet human children, either for their purity or as replacements for their own sickly offspring. Elves were believed to steal human babies, replacing them with one of their own. These changelings were often sickly, deformed, or unusually demanding, bringing misery to the family. The changeling myth wasn't unique to the Norse. It spread throughout Europe, but in Scandinavian traditions, it took on a particularly eerie tone. Parents took elaborate precautions to protect their children from elf abductions. Iron, considered a powerful ward against supernatural beings, was often placed in or near the crib. Interestingly, elves were also tied to the changing of the seasons, particularly the winter solstice. This was a time of great celebration for the Norse people, marking the return of the sun. But it was also a time when the veil between the human world and the spirit world was believed to be thinnest. Elves, along with other supernatural beings, were thought to be particularly active during this period. Many winter solstice traditions involved honoring these beings, leaving offerings to ensure their goodwill for the coming year. As Norse culture spread through trade, conquest, and migration, the stories of elves traveled with it. Over time, these beings began to merge with local folklore in other parts of Europe, becoming the household spirits, fairies, and goblins that we find in later medieval tales. But even as their image changed, the roots of Norse mythology remained. As Christianity spread across Scandinavia and other parts of Europe during the 9th to 12th centuries, the perception of beings like elves underwent a profound transformation. Once seen as mystical, semi-divine entities, elves were gradually reinterpreted through the lens of Christian theology and cultural dominance. During this time, elves were reimagined as malevolent or mischievous spirits aligned with the devil. Stories emerged portraying elves as tempters or bringers of misfortune. They were blamed for causing illness, infertility, and bad luck. In Old English and Norse folklore, unexplained illnesses in livestock or people were attributed to elf shot, or arrows invisibly fired by elves. Under Christian influence, this was reinterpreted as a form of demonic attack. While early Norse myths depicted dark elves as mysterious and shadowy, Christianized tales amplified their malevolence. Elves became more closely associated with nightmares or night spirit, mental disturbances, and even possession. As Christianity spread into the British Isles, Norse and Germanic elves began to merge with Celtic fairy lore. The distinctions between elves, fairies, and other supernatural beings started to blend. This integration shifted the perception of elves from powerful, otherworldly beings to smaller, whimsical, and mischievous figures. In earlier traditions, elves were often human-sized or even larger. However, under the influence of Celtic fairy stories, they were increasingly depicted as small, almost childlike creatures, often tied to domestic settings and human interactions. Geoffrey Chaucer's The Wife of Bath's Tale provides a glimpse into the evolving perception of elves during the late medieval period. In this tale, Chaucer describes a world where fairies and elves once roamed freely, but have since been replaced by Christian clergy. This shed light on the diminishing presence of magical beings in daily life, relegating them to folklore and imagination. In Chaucer's account, elves are no longer seen as grand, otherworldly beings, but rather as diminished, mischievous creatures. William Shakespeare's famous play A Midsummer Night's Dream cemented the playful, trickster image of elves in the cultural imagination. By Shakespeare's time, elf was often used interchangeably with fairy, though elves were seen as slightly more grounded or earthy. Characters like Puck or Robin Goodfellow epitomize this shift. He embodies the mischievous, helpful traits of earlier elves, but is firmly called a fairy in the play, showing how the two concepts were blending by the Elizabethan period. Puck delights in causing confusion and playing pranks, which added to the mischievous narrative. Shakespeare's fairies are small and sprightly, far removed from the majestic, human-sized elves of earlier Norse mythology. While literature popularized the whimsical and playful aspects of elves, European folklore kept their domestic roles alive. By the Middle Ages, elves had become closely tied to household spirits that could help or hinder families depending on how they were treated. Some of these included brownies, which were small magical beings believed to inhabit homes, performing chores at night in exchange for small offerings like milk, bread, or porridge. However, neglecting or insulting them could lead to trouble. If angered, brownies were known to disrupt household routines, break objects, or disappear altogether. Over time, brownies became part of the broader folklore of small magical helpers, blending with the image of elves in popular imagination. In Scandinavian folklore, the nisse played a similar role. These small gnome-like beings were guardians of the farmstead, ensuring the well-being of animals and crops if properly honored. Forget to leave a bowl of porridge for them, and they might retaliate with pranks or even bring misfortune to the household. By the late 18th century, these household spirits had become firmly established in the collective imagination as industrious, protective, and deeply connected to domestic life. Their association with work, loyalty, and rewards would directly influence the later depiction of Santa's elves in 19th century Christmas traditions. One of the most famous depictions of elves as helpful figures comes from a fairy tale that has been told and retold for centuries: The Elves and the Shoemaker. This beloved story, collected by the Brothers Grimm in the early 19th century, offers a glimpse into how elves transitioned from their mysterious, often menacing roots to the cheerful helpers we recognize today. In the tale, a poor shoemaker is down to his last piece of leather. Unable to make enough shoes to earn a living, he resigns himself to despair. But as he sleeps, something miraculous happens. In the morning, he finds that his leather has been transformed into a pair of exquisite shoes, perfectly crafted and ready to sell. This cycle repeats each night. The shoemaker leaves out his last scraps of leather, and by morning, they've been turned into beautiful shoes. Soon, the shoemaker and his wife grow prosperous thanks to the mysterious helpers they've never seen. One night, instead of leaving out leather, they make tiny clothes and shoes for the elves. When the elves discover these gifts, they are delighted, but they never return to the workshop. The shoemaker's mysterious helpers have vanished forever. Elves, like other household spirits, were believed to help humans in exchange for offerings or respect. By providing clothing for the elves, the shoemaker fulfills this unspoken agreement, releasing them from their obligation to help. Sound familiar? This theme of freedom granted through gifts appears in other folklore as well, such as the freeing of house elves like Dobby in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. The story of the shoemaker's elves has inspired countless adaptations, from children's books to animated films. In The Elves and the Shoemaker, we see how elves transitioned from mysterious household spirits to symbols of kindness and magic. This transformation mirrors their larger journey through history, one that would eventually lead them to Santa's workshop. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to give it a like. It really helps me to be able to bring more stories like this one to you, so thank you. Fast forward to 1823, and elves make a surprising appearance in an unlikely place. 'Twas the night before Christmas was first published anonymously on December 23rd, 1823, in the Troy Sentinel, a New York newspaper. It was titled A Visit from St. Nicholas. The poem was widely reprinted in subsequent years, often without attribution. In 1837, Clement Clarke Moore was credited with the poem after it was included in a collection of his works. However, some scholars debate whether Moore was the actual author, with some suggesting Major Henry Livingston Jr. as a possible alternative. Written as a light-hearted depiction of Christmas Eve, the poem describes St. Nicholas as a right jolly old elf. This description may seem strange today, but at the time, Santa Claus wasn't the towering grandfatherly figure we imagine. The Santa described in "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" combines elements of both small, elf-like characteristics and the jolly, round figure that later became more widely recognized. Before this, Santa Claus, or St. Nicholas, was often portrayed as a somber, saintly figure rooted in Dutch and German traditions. Moore's poem reinvented him as a more cheerful, magical character, complete with a sleigh, flying reindeer, and a sack full of toys. This was one of the first times elves and Christmas became explicitly linked in popular culture. However, it would still be decades before the idea of elves as Santa's helpers would fully take shape. Let's now step into the 19th century world of Victorian England. This was a time of great fascination with the supernatural, as the Romantic movement had revived interest in myths, fairy tales, and folklore. Victorians were obsessed with the mystical and otherworldly, but they sanitized and romanticized these stories, turning fearsome beings into whimsical characters. Elves, once feared for their mischief or malice, were softened into playful, benevolent figures. This transformation wasn't limited to Christmas. It reflected a broader cultural shift. The Victorians adored fairies, often depicting them as small, childlike creatures with magical powers. These images appeared in everything from paintings to literature, cementing their place in the collective imagination. But how did these Victorian ideals influence Christmas? By the mid-19th century, Christmas was evolving into the family-centered holiday we recognize today. Industrialization had made goods more accessible, allowing for elaborate celebrations, while Queen Victoria and Prince Albert's German traditions, like decorating Christmas trees, popularized festive customs. In this context, elves became perfect symbols for the season. They represented magic and a touch of whimsy, qualities that aligned with the holiday's growing emphasis on joy and wonder. American illustrators also played a crucial role in shaping the modern image of Christmas elves. In the 1870s, Harper's Weekly published a series of Christmas-themed illustrations by Thomas Nast. Nast is often credited with creating the modern image of Santa Claus, but his artwork also hinted at elves working alongside Santa. These illustrations helped solidify the idea of a North Pole workshop filled with magical helpers. It's no coincidence that elves became associated with workshops and industriousness during the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution was transforming society, and the idea of small, tireless workers producing toys and gifts for Christmas paralleled the bustling factories of the time. Elves were playful yet magical, which made them the perfect companions for Santa Claus as he evolved into the iconic jolly figure we know today. By the end of the 19th century, elves had become fully integrated into Christmas folklore. They were no longer feared tricksters or mysterious spirits, but joyful symbols of holiday cheer. By the 20th century, the modern characteristics of Christmas elves were firmly established. They became central to Santa's narrative, managing the workshop, building toys, and organizing the Christmas Eve gift delivery. Elves were playful, hard-working, and fiercely loyal to Santa. Their mischievous streak now took the form of harmless pranks rather than malicious tricks. Over time, these playful and industrious helpers evolved into the iconic Christmas figures we recognize today. The elves' association with Santa became more vibrant as popular culture and holiday traditions transformed their image. Starring in festive tales, they embraced a new look of red and green attire, mirroring the cheerful hues of the holiday season. Their mischievous yet endearing personalities have since taken center stage, delighting children and adults alike in movies, stories, and Christmas displays. This marked their place not only as Santa's loyal companions, but as timeless symbols of Christmas magic. Thank you for joining me for this story. Until next time, stay mystical. If you made it this far and liked the video, don't forget to give it a like. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's your favorite elf movie or book? Did you know this about their origins? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to join the growing community of mystic seekers. Thanks for watching.